Right. The floor is yours.
Well, seeing as we have a huge auditorium, well, book illustration. It means really that when you have a book and you are sort of given the project, I think I'm going to start again. This thing's very good. Book illustration. It began many years ago, sort of highly tooled, very beautifully bound volumes that people couldn't afford. When the First World War came along, there was a population which was much more erudite than it is today. People more educated, they decided they wanted to read things that were otherwise out of their control years ago. So in fact they began to demand good literature. And a very interesting project was put to them, that if they put very good literature in a very cheap form, in a book, form which was cheap to produce, and yet the information inside was extremely interesting, people would buy it. And of course Penguin was that. Do come in. No? Penguin was that publisher. They were very cheap to produce because they were not bound, they were just stamped and stuck together. And they fell apart almost as soon as you read them. But in fact, they were cheap, they were available, and people began to really think this was big business. After the Second World War, printing became more cheaper, especially in colour production. And so somebody in the powers that be had a very good idea of putting a colour image on the front to try and sell the book. And in fact, that was the start of the paperback industry as we know today. Because of this desire to have the books shops full of images which attract the eye and make sure that you actually go and pick that book up and want to buy it, there's a tremendous range of illustrators that are used to put these images on the fronts of books. For instance, you wouldn't have a cowboy illustrator doing a flower arranging book, or you wouldn't have a flower arranging illustrator doing sort of a war book. So in fact you are categorised as an illustrator into what kind of work will suit your style and what will suit the books. And the category that we've been put in has been fantasy illustration. For some reason, that's the way it goes. So what it means is that when you get a manuscript, the editors and the art editors look at the manuscript and think that maybe there are a number of artists who would suit this kind of work and would help sell their product, which is the book. And when they get in touch with you, some of them are extremely critical about what goes on the front, but a great majority of them just say, read it and find something interesting in it. And that's the nicest part of it, really. Because if they're too demanding about what goes on the front cover, it limits your style. But if you're given free range, you often produce something which is much, much better. So that really is, I think since about 1960s, 70s, this has been a great part of the publishing industry. Has been repackaging books that have already been out of print. That means that if they go to a second edition, they have to reprint. It's a good idea to get another book jacket on the front and up the price. So once they raise, they recoup some of that money. But also, it also gives new titles an advantage because the author has a great deal to say about what choice of image goes on the front. So with the first manuscript that you're given, which is completely coming from the author, he or she has a lot to say about how her cover is looking. After it goes to second or third or reprint, they really don't have very much control. But it's nice to have a liaison between the author and the illustrator, because then you're working as a team to make sure that you have as good an image as possible in front. So we came into this about 1970. We were started by Patrick Woodruff, who had seen our work and said, you ought not to be teaching kids, you ought to be illustrating books. So he was the sort of person who got us started. And we were very fortunate to be taken on by one of London's top illustrating agencies. And we've been in work ever since. We sort of left their auspices about 3 years ago and decided to go completely on our own, because we really wanted to make the step from book jackets into complete books, which is a much nicer way of being an illustrator. But this is basically the way that you get started, is with book jackets. Often, if you get one jacket to do, and there's a follow-up or a sequence, they tend to like to use the same illustrator to give a continuity to the whole series. It can be extremely varied, but for the most part it does seem to be the fantasy market that we seem to have collared, as it were. What happens is they send you the manuscript. You read about half of it. If it's good, you think, gosh, I wish I could read more, but I haven't got time. If it's really bad, you think, thank goodness there's not much more of this to read. From about halfway through, you get an idea of what the book's about. You get all the characters, the main characters appear by about halfway through the book. The kind of landscape that's being used, the time scale, everything else becomes clear after about halfway through. And then you do your rough drawing. It's reasonably detailed. I can pass these around. The more detailed you make them, the better it is for your purposes, because then there's no excuse. There's someone back as well. Reverse. Then the editor and the author have an idea of what you're doing. You can also give an idea of what colours you're going to use. How much type you're going to leave at the top. If it's a front cover, you have to always leave half of the illustration left blank. So you can put your typography and the name of the author and any gump about the book. And as soon as they receive that, they have a big meeting where they go to a conflab and decide what they're going to do with it. There might be a few changes, but for the most part, it does seem to remain as it is. We don't really have to change very much of what we do. Then it's returned to you with any comments necessary, and then they give you about 3 weeks to produce the artwork. It used to be done on CS10, which was a board which has a lovely surface like ivory. It's very, very nice. But the printers used to strip it, so we don't do that anymore. We give them on hardboard. We say, strip that, you can. Because what they do is they put it around a scanner, and instead of taking a 5x4 transparency, they tend to use the technology which is at their fingertips, and they put it around a drum, which of course, if it's not flexible card, won't go, so they have to strip it, which completely ruins your artworks. So we now either charge them double, which puts them off tremendously, or as I say, we do it on hardboard. But a 5x4 transparency does just as well, really, especially if it's good. The artwork is then sent, as you've done the artwork, you put it either through data post or whatever, security, and you send it up to the editor, who then sends it to the author, so that the author can have a look and see whether there's any discrepancy between his text and your interpretation. And if everything goes okay, you never hear another word from them. If you don't hear within about 2 weeks, you know you're okay. If you hear within a few days, you know there's something that has to be drastically changed on it. But it's surprising how quiet they go when they've got the artwork and, and it's up to a paycheck. Then, after about 3 months, I suppose, you get a proof. And these are in fact all the proofs that you see. Flip through some of the talking ones. There are various ways of selling products, and they try everything at their disposal to try and sell their books. This one was particularly interesting. This one was done for Century Hutchinson, and it was an extremely large volume. It was really thick, and they had the idea that they were going to hype the market up by having 6 illustrators do different covers and put them all in bookshops, as if it was a sort of a huge. They had so much potential. They thought there was so much potential with this book that they could have 6 illustrators illustrate it. So it was very peculiar because you saw Sarah in various bookshops, all with different covers on, and this was in fact one of them. But it was a book that was about Sarah Butcher's And it was the whole history of Salisbury, right from the clay, where you have the sort of monuments and the druids, right the way through to the Second World War. So it was a vast novel and highly successful. But it does just shows how far book publishers will go to try and sell their product. It was very costly to have 6 illustrators do 6 different covers because it's not cheap, it's printed. But they recouped, and of course all other publishers were extremely annoyed that they'd done so well after this cover, but there you go. And this was actually the one where the Black Death was sort of reaping its vengeance on Sarah. Roger was very fortunate to have the Tolkien stuff to do, which are the drawings you see there. Christopher Tolkien was not at all keen on having an American artist do his imagery of his father, simply because it was extremely English. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is a very, very English book, and to have it Americanized was something he didn't want. So for years he made a stipulation that nobody was to illustrate his father's works except for Falling Veins, who he approved of, and using his father's own illustrations. So for years they trundled along with these books, with the same illustrations occurring year after year after year. And the sales sort of were steady, but they didn't actually improve. And then they sort of tried twisting Christopher Tolkien's arm, saying, well, you really ought to repackage your father's work, it's getting a bit sort of dull. And Roger's work was seen as completely another project, and Christopher Tolkien was in London. And he saw the work and he said, I think we'll have this illustrated, we'll have a go at him doing one of the works. And the first one was approved, and from then on he did the 1984 calendar, the 1989, and he's done about 30 book jackets for the Tolkien estate. So he's almost, it was taken over, Unwin Hyman with the publishers, and we were taken over by Collins this year. All the little tiny publishers are being gobbled up by all the big ones. Maxwell, you've heard of all the companies that he's got. Penguin is now an enormous, vast bureaucracy of various subtitles, of sub-imprints within that one organisation. And Collins is just the same, it's just taken over Unwin Hyman. And we thought this is the end, right, that's it. And apparently Roger is now part of the Tolkien estate, so he travels with whoever buys the company. So it's quite nice to have a Tolkien estate. But it has been, to some extent, a mixed blessing, because as far as he's concerned, people say, oh, well, that's all he can do. But it isn't really. It's just simply that you're a bit typecast, like an actor, really. As soon as you've been successful at one acting part, they think, oh yes, the next part that actor gets is always similar to the one that they've had before. And illustrators, to some extent, do fall into this category. You do tend to get very much categorised. They like to put you into pigeonholes and say, well, she's safe in there, and he's safe in there, and they'll never come out. And this was one reason why we decided not to do so many book jackets and to get on with our own projects, which is you've got more control over what you do. I think that's really about all I can say, except that it's more exciting when you do complete projects. This is one for, it's not a particularly good one, but we're working for the same company and they've driven us mad with this project we're doing at the moment. But you can see there's a great continuity of work when you actually are given a whole project to do on your own. It's more prestige, because the number of people who say, wait, go away. The number of people who say, well, now I've seen your work, I know you've done that. But they try, I think the publishers try to denigrate the artist to a sub-level. They have stopped putting your credits on the back, so nobody knows who's done them. And to some extent, this has sort of limited your availability to the public. You're known for the images you do, but you're not known for your name. And the only way you can do this is to produce a complete project. And so really this is the way that you do get more into the public eye, when you do a whole book, because then you get credit, or you do a whole project and then you get credit. Just book jackets, I mean, they couldn't care if it's Joe Blogs or whatever, just as long as they get their packaging, and that's the end of it. So to some extent, it has been rather sad that they have adopted this policy, simply because in the first place they wanted to keep the artists to themselves. century would not tell Fontana which artists they were using in case they got poached. Which is a bit naughty because we are all freelance and we ought to be able to work for everybody. So it means that the only way you could do that is by footwork. You have to make the great trudges right round London and then to Liverpool, seeing publishers and seeing editors to show the work you've done, simply because they can no longer tell who's done what because the work is not on the back of the book, which is very unfortunate. But we have moved in where do I see. But that's basically what book publishing is all about. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Questions? I'll kick off, and so we can pass this mic around. It works. It works.
It works. It works.
It does. I'll kick the rest of the peer view. Illustration is very much it's a job as opposed to pure art. I mean, it's obvious you have a love of what you do, but I remember Chris Achilles once turned and said there are hundreds of paintings he has in his mind. He wants to paint them, but he's an illustrator. It's his job, and unless somebody pays him to paint what he wants, he can't afford the time to do it. Do you find that when you come up with a book cover, you think, I read manuscript, I've got the image I've been waiting to use for ages, and you put it in, or is it very, or do you really go in with a blank mind until you read the manuscript?
I think you've got to go with that line because it's got to be so close to the story. If you start putting interpretations too much, it doesn't bear any resemblance to it.
The other problem is making a living. I mean, you obviously got to be commissioned to get the money, whereas if you want to do your own painting and once you've created that painting and you try to sell it, who do you sell it to? How do you sell it? So as an illustrator, you really have to be commissioned to make an income. Any other questions?
Here we go. Right, I'll just turn down that mic a little bit. Excuse us.
If it is such a problem with the companies not providing the names on covers and things, why can't you just write into a contract or something that you have to have your name on your artwork?
Very good question. The problem is that, well, it's not a problem. It's hoisted by your own petard, really, because if you can possibly get away without signing a contract, you do. The thing is that publishing is a very strange world. In fact, we're working with a person from San Francisco who does not know this at the moment. And he thinks that unless everything is written into his contract, nobody will honour anything. And yet, when you look at publishing, it is about the only thing in the 19th century, the only occupation that a gentleman of quality could do and make money out of it, and still have a feeling of being honoured in the society in which you live. And publishing is that. I mean, you think of Matt Miller. I mean, Matt Miller was our Prime Minister. Years ago. It has always, and because of that, there is still this feeling of a gentleman's word is his bond, and it still goes through today. Nobody says to you, you've got to sign a contract before I will give you the manuscript, because how do I know you're not going to go off and not do it? They phone you up and they say, would you like to do it? And you say, yes, that's fine. Then you talk money and they say, is that okay? Oh, and they go, oh, wow, oh. And then you sort of haggle a bit, and then they say, yes, that's fine. It's not as if when the artwork is done and it's gone to print and you get paid, they say, oh, but you didn't sign a contract, so we're going to knock 100 quid off. They never do that. It's all gentleman's word at his bond. So it works both ways. If you have a contract, then they're going to write all sorts of things into it, which is probably going to be to your detriment. So you can't sell your second rights on it and things like that. You might get your name on the front, or the reverse of the cover, but you might lose an awful lot into the bonus. I think I prefer to leave it as it is.
Anyone else? No? More questions?
When you read the manuscript, what is it that triggers off what you're going to draw? Is it a scene or a person or an event? Is it any particular thing?
There are two ways you can do that. Either you come across a scene in the book which seems to encapsulate what the whole book is about. Sorry.
Thank you.
Or, and then that makes the front cover. As long as it doesn't give the plot away. I made a terrible mistake with a Molly Hunter book for children some time ago. I made a wonderful, I thought it was a really lovely run where he was a Selkie, but nobody knew he was a Selkie until, maybe his shape changed, until the last 2 or 3 pages. And I put him on the front, you see, and completely gave the book away, so I had to do it again. So you learn your lesson only halfway through the book and then stop. It's either a passage which says, yes, that is what the book is about, or it's a culmination of lots of images that have been used in the book that you can actually produce a book cover from. I don't know if I've got an example of that. Yes, that's the one where all the images that are used in the book have been put together to form a sort of collage, which is made up of all sorts of the magic of the book, really. The one down here, around the outside edges, is a collage of all the magic of what it contains. But the 2 insets for the back and the front, that's a wrapper and cover, is actually little scenes from it. So that sort of puts the 2 together. But yes, it's either one or the other.
Perhaps a technical question while Alison's all rotating outside there. Does the context of what you do dictate the medium that you work in, or do you just generally sort of stick with what you like, or do you tend to find that a children's book tends to want a more bright, sharper image, so you use bold colours, different techniques? How do you sort of go around it? Do you come up with an image and then put it in the medium? Or do you decide I want to do something with that medium?
What I normally do is read the book, obviously, and then as you're reading the book, an image will come up. And then, as Linda said, it's probably a collage of images which come up. And then, obviously, you've got to try and create the mood of the book, but also remembering that you're a packager. Whatever you do, it has to sell the book. With the Tolkien work, loads of images. There's 3 or 4 images on a page. But not every one of those images will sell the book. And the other thing is, there's a fashion. When we first started off, dragons were in, but now it seems that since I did the long Tolkien image, I've already seen it, which wrapped around the trilogy of Lord of the Rings, which was all landscape, then that fired off a lot of landscape painting. So I think at the moment landscapes are in rather than figure work and rather than dragons and that sort of thing. So it depends a lot on fashion and what is selling at the moment.
How many of these trends have there been?
Don't know. 2 in my case. I enjoy landscapes, I must admit, and I think you can create more atmosphere with a landscape. Neither of us are these sort of superhero illustrators like Boris and all the rest of them. So, we're known for the sort of more lyrical, magical feel to our work. That's the type of work we get. It all tends to be Tolkien-esque. I'm doing Piers Anthony's books at the moment, which are a bit strange. I don't know whether I enjoy them, but...
Excuse me, which Piers Anthony books are you doing?
I'm doing I did The Veil of the Bowl and that series.
Which format?
Pass.
It's bad, obviously.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it, that's The Veil of the Bowl I did, yeah. I'll sign up for it. But the other images on the other 3 books are much better.
12 ones.
Yeah.
Which is Heaven Sent and...
That's right, yeah. Man from Mundania. Yeah. And the one I'm working on, Isle View, is the next one.
There's another one?
Yeah, and the one after that. The two others, I've got just got the manuscripts. Yeah, I think the fee goes down because it's 25.
You said the fee goes down because it's about 25%.
That's right.
Do either of you have a favourite author that you'd like to illustrate for, or a particular book that appeals to you?
I'd like to do Armadacon.
I'll work with the next door.
Yeah.
I like M. John Harrison. M. John Harrison. I give him a plug. He's absolutely wonderful. His work it's got that wonderful Gothic quality which you haven't seen since Edgar Allan Poe. He's really good. But he's a real, very meticulous writer. He's not very doesn't produce many books a year, probably about 2. But I've done both of his Vericonium and Invericonium. They were wonderful. I enjoyed them tremendously. But it's surprising how when you get a good author or a good authoress, how your game is risen. You know, you can lift your game. If it's really awful, and I mean some of the stuff we've had from the States has been really appalling, and you think, how the hell can I produce anything from this? It's absolute drivel. And then you think, well, they're going to get me on the trades description if I do something really wonderful, because you've got to sort of go with it and try and produce something. But I do admit that if you get a good author, you really do pull the stops out and go ahead with it. But I like him, and Michael Reeves is very good as well. Michael Reeves, Shattered World, is another very thick sort of stuff. But then again, I mean, I suppose you're more science fiction in your attitudes, whereas we have never been science fiction illustrators. We've always been fantasy illustrators.
When you're doing a series of books that have been multiple printed, the Tolkien books, they've been printed, I mean, Hobbit's 50 years old. Do you find that you do an illustration and you love it, and then somebody looks at it and says, well, it's not right, you know, they've always done this dragon with 5 legs and you've given him 7, or that guy's is blonde haired and blue eyed and you've got him grey haired. Do people sort of criticise your work based on other people's work, or do they generally take it at face value?
Through running the gallery, that we've got all the originals up, and the general opinion of people coming through, the imagery that I come up with is similar to their imagery. But as a student, I read Lord of the Rings first of all, and I thought, well, this book doesn't need illustrating. I mean, and it's something that I would never have chosen to illustrate, because everyone who reads it has their own image, and I think if you see illustrations, it's like seeing a film and then reading the book after. It never comes up to your expectations. So I don't, although obviously being commissioned to do it, I mean, you don't turn it down. It's obviously got my name around the publishers. You know, I was pleased to do it. But I don't know what I was saying. My brain goes, it's the aluminium. Or old age, I'm not sure which.
Another question? Anybody? Yeah, right up.
Do you have anybody in particular that influences your work? You know, whether it's outside of the current day, you know, sort of that art?
We've never looked at contemporary illustrators for inspiration. We've always looked to the old masters. I mean, I like Bruegel, Bosch, Dürer, that type of artist. And then there's the Viennese artists like Ernst Fuchs, which you probably haven't come across. Omni did an article on them several years ago. They're sort of not surrealists, but they're what do we call themselves? Realistic, fantastic over something, which and their imagery is terrific and very fashionable in the fine art world. And this is the barrier that Linda and I at the moment are trying to break. We're trying to break away from illustration and get our work accepted in the fine art world. This is why we started the gallery. This is why we started putting our work through auctions. We put work through the Phillips auctions and got good prices for them. Barons and Torquay are interested in our work, and I think it's going to be a very collectible art form in the near future, because fine art has gone in its strange ways with its bricks, and I think people are getting bored with sort of splashes and stuff like that. And they're wanting to see real painting, real drawing. Figurative work is becoming very fashionable. If you look at the Glasgow art scene at the moment, it's all figurative. So we're just hoping that we've timed it right to actually break from illustration and go into fine art. But also having the gallery, it's been able to generate another income for us, so that we're hoping that we can go ahead now and do our own paintings, put them into reproductions and publish our own prints, etc. Being a bit sort of mercenary, I'm afraid, but I mean we've all got to make a living.
You mentioned right at the beginning of your talk that Christopher Tobin was very particular that he wanted English artists, it was an English book. Is it a case of a book that you would illustrate by author X, John Smith, which is going to be published in America and Britain? Do you generally find that a cover that presents the book well in Britain is not the one that does well in America?
Oh, well, it doesn't go at all well in America. Although, when we first started, through our agent, we used to get American work, but it's not punchy enough, our work.
Sex, drugs and rock and roll.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
It's got to be that. It's a different culture, obviously. And we're too sort of lyrical, magical, soft and dopey.
I see what you mean, because you tend to find Americans are very much, they are punchy covers.
Yeah.
They don't pull the punches. If it's going to be a nude woman, it's all nude.
Yeah.
But here it's tastefully
Although,
decorated.
yeah, saying that, we did a board game for TSR back in the 70s, and that was going to be published in America. And they took it over to America. The big thing is, it's a big adventure game, like Dungeons and Dragons. It was called Dragon's Teeth. And on it, we had lots of monsters that had to be killed. And there was a vampire that had bitten the neck of a maiden, and we had blood just dripping down the neck. We had to paint that out. That wasn't acceptable to the Americans. We had a sphinx, and it had nipples on it.
Oh, shame.
We had to paint that out. So, I mean, the American market is peculiar. I mean, I don't know how some of them get away with it. You know, whether things have changed in 10 years, perhaps it has. But I bet there must be an army of sort of Mary Whitehouse people that sort of troop around and, you know, censor book covers and whatever.
Another question.
If you are producing and sort of starting to produce your own work and print it, how do you find outlets for it? To sort of make it all successful and pay for itself?
Very great difficulty, actually. We went to Olympia this year, which was the Gallery 90 exhibition. We thought, right, this is it, we're going to crack it this year. So we went there, and it was all sort of paintings of doggies and you know, sort of hobby and boats, and I thought, God, what are we doing here? And yet people sort of came and went, oh, good grief, that's different, and went away, and then they'd come back, and they sort of ordered. So we've begun to get orders from other galleries, but it's going to be a very slow process because they're so used to doggies and, you know, sort of spaniels and horses being sort of shired in lovely country pubs and things like this that, you know, people got used to. It's so new. It's quite shocking to some people. We've just got to come to terms with it. But we're finding that we've got a gallery in Richmond, which is a gallery which takes fantasy work. They take Jim Burns, us, Achilles, Ian McCaig, quite a lot of illustrators. I don't know if you remember Peter Patrick. And they had the same problem. When they first opened, everyone was looking in the window and were so shocked by what they saw. They walked past. They had this barrier that they couldn't step through the door. They felt it wasn't for them. And I think people also get a bit worried whether the gallery is going to succeed or whether it's going to fail, and they don't want to be associated with it. So they give it the sort of passage of time, and it's been going about a year now, and it's going very, very well. Suddenly the confidence is there. People are stepping in the door. They're actually finding that they're not going to get eaten if they step through this door in the fantasy world. And it's beginning to sell extremely well. But it does take a lot of time to try and make the general public aware that there is another art form on the market. And this is definitely another art form. People are so used to seeing it on bookshelves, but they don't realise that now is an opportunity to sort of see it in your own home, sort of thing. It's an uphill struggle, but it's worth it.
We're getting to run a bit short of time, so we've got a few last questions. I was speaking to you before we actually started this panel, and you mentioned to me the project you've been working on of your dream cards. Can you sort of explain a little bit to everybody else what it is you've been sort of concentrating on?
Well, we were introduced to this project about 2 years ago. They said, it's wonderful, you're going to really enjoy it, it's going to be absolutely brilliant. Do you want to do it? Of course. We said, oh yes, it sounds wonderful. So we went and had a chat and sort of worked it all out. And it still sounded wonderful. And when it came to do the project, it was 66 dream cards, which was going to be done in a year, but they knocked 4 months off the deadline, which meant that we had 66 to do in about 8 months, which was going it a bit really. So we've been heads down, sort of eyes on stalks. We've only been let out today as a sort of special treat. We now have 7 to do. But the contents kept getting most peculiar. Because, of course, I don't know, I'm sure you've all read Carl Jung, of course you have, 12 volumes. It's based on that, but it's also this man's own ideas. And as the project got on, it got more and more sexual. I mean, you wouldn't believe what we had to paint. It was totally amazing. And we haven't got a fax. It's either, do we want the garden gates or do we want a fax? No, I think we'd rather have the garden gates. So I'm afraid we haven't bought a fax. We've used the one in Boston. And we've been banned from the fax machine. Because the pornographic literature that was coming through was just too much for the ladies who work faxing. It was quite amazing. So we now go around town as I'm the sort of scarlet lady, hence the red stocking. And I think the gallery was sort of going to have lots of sort of dirty old men in flashing raincoats with pebble glasses. I'm sure they're going to come. But it really has been fun. But it's just that the interpretation of dreams is a subject which does touch on your deepest psyche and your deepest thoughts. And it's trying really to put into visual terms the kinds of dreams that people have, which of course is extremely difficult, especially when you've got this army of merry white houses in the States who are going to sort of ban whatever you do. So we've had to calm Strephon down terribly. We can't paint that Strephon, I'm sorry. You're going to have to think again. Oh, really? Oh, San Francisco isn't anything, isn't San Francisco? Are you sure you can't paint this? No. So we've got prude written on our foreheads. Terribly prudish couple who won't paint naughty things. But it should be quite interesting. I wouldn't say we've enjoyed it, but it should be interesting.
We have time for one last question, if he's got one. Just clarification. So is this a series of postcards? Or what?
It's almost like a tarot pack, but they're square. And apparently there are 9 archetypal dreams that you have, or sections to do with ego, self, male, female, adversity, that sort of thing. Apparently, there are only about 9 or 10 images that, for each of those particular cards, that you actually do dream. So really, without us, it's not as if we have a vast store of information that people do dream. They do actually dream, and you can compartmentalise them. And this is what they try to do. So that if you have a dream and you want an interpretation of it, apparently you're supposed to be able to flip through the card, 66 of them, which is going to take you all morning. And you're supposed to be able to come up with 1, 2, and 3, which sort of, between the 3 of them, give a full interpretation of your dream. And then there's a sort of card pack book which accompanies this, which actually gives you more detail of what's all about. He's a sort of parapsychologist. Perfect. He's got this thing about pubic hair, that's what most of it's about. Our son is 13 years old. There's not enough pubic hair, Mum. You've got to have more pubic hair.
It's all right, we've got a picture in the art competition that can solve that. Haven't we, David?
Not mine. The picture is, sorry, yes. We have run out of time. Roger and Linda Garland, thank you very much. Just before you all rush off and rush out the queue off by our work, save your pennies. Roger and Linda donated this print. It is Dragonfly.
For God's sake.
You'll regret that forever, Dave, I guarantee
for my next impression. Right, Dragonflight, it's your
It was a sort of combined effort.
it's a combined effort. Painted by them, held by me, ruined by Steve. Right, it is number 30 of 919 prints. They donated it for the auction. Thank you very much. And McCaffrey will be signing the back. So you can either look at that side or you can look at that side. I'd rather look at that side. I think it's got a lot of work in it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Linda, much gone.